Testing, testing, tonight.
Well, good afternoon. I believe it's 1 o'clock, so we'll start the meeting. First of all, welcome back. Appreciate everybody in attendance and giving of your time for the mission of this commission. Before I get going, I want to recognize that we have a member new to the commission. That's Shauna Koger. Shauna, welcome. Shauna is a teacher at Arlington and wasn't with us at the first meeting, and the reason she wasn't is she wasn't appointed yet. So she has been recently appointed, and we thank the Arlington Public Schools for making you available to us today, and thank you for making the venture down to Lincoln. So welcome. Also, one other thing, for the good of the commission and the good of Nebraska, I think we should recognize a newlywed at this table. Grant Latimer has been happily married for 8 days?
Yeah.
8 days, 9 days? And it's my understanding that is it just,
That was last weekend.
yeah.
Not Saturday, Tuesday.
It's, so happily married for 9 days, and I understand your wife has been happily married for at least half of that, so congratulations. Okay, that's uncalled for. Let's get the meeting going. The September 22nd School Financing Review Commission meeting will come to order. Good afternoon and welcome to the September 22nd, 2025 School Financing Review Commission. With the recording secretary, please call the roll. And before you do, just a reminder, please turn your mic on when responding to questions today or any comments that you might make. And also, when you are done, please turn it off. So.
Tom Breezy, Jason Dolliver.
Here.
Ann Foster,
Present.
Shavonna Holman,
Present.
Shauna Koger,
Present.
Grant Latimer,
Present.
Luann Linehan,
Present.
Brian Maher,
Present.
Fred Meyer,
Present.
Aaron Ploss,
Present.
Keith Runge,
Present.
John Schwartz,
Present.
Sarah Scott,
Present.
Liz Standish,
Present.
Paul Turman,
Present.
Senator Elliot Bostar, Senator Jana Hughes,
Present.
Senator Dave Merman, 14 voting members present, 1 non-voting member present.
Okay, would you please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? Information regarding the Open Meetings Act is posted as you enter the room from the main entrance doors. The minutes of the previous meeting were provided with the notice of this meeting. A copy is also provided for each commission member. Are there any corrections to the minutes? Is there a motion for agenda item 3?
So moved.
We have a motion.
Second that.
We have a second, Aaron Ploss. It is moved and seconded to approve the minutes of this previous School Financing Review Commission meeting. With the recording secretary, please call the roll.
Paul Turman,
Yes.
Aaron Ploss,
Yes.
Grant Latimer,
Yes.
Jason Dolliver,
Yes.
Sarah Scott,
Yes.
Shavonna Holman,
Yes.
Keith Runge,
Yes.
Tom Breezy, Ann Foster,
Yes.
Shauna Koger,
Yes.
Liz Standish,
Yes.
John Schwartz,
Yes.
Luann Linehan,
Yes.
Brian Maher,
Yes.
Fred Meyer,
Yes.
14 yes.
The affirmative has it, and the motion to approve the minutes of the previous School Financing Review Commission meeting is adopted. Agenda item 4, Committee Chair Liz Standish will report on behalf of the ad hoc committee.
Yes, before you, you have the draft operating procedures that I would move approval if we take motions prior to discussion. So I would make that motion and be happy to answer any questions, as I know all members received a copy of the policies and might have questions, and be happy to answer those.
I'd second the motion.
The motion is to adopt the proposed permanent operating policies. Is there any discussion? Would the recording secretary please call the roll?
Shavonna Holman,
Aye.
Liz Standish,
Yes?
Paul Turman,
Yes.
Luann Linehan,
Yes.
John Schwartz,
Yes.
Sarah Scott,
Yes.
Brian Maher,
Yes.
Jason Dolliver,
Yes.
Tom Breezy, Keith Runge,
Yes.
Ann Foster,
Yes.
Grant Latimer,
Yes.
Aaron Plaus,
Yes.
Shauna Koger,
Yes.
Fred Meyer,
Yes.
14 yes.
The affirmative has it, and the motion to adopt the proposed permanent operating policies is adopted. Next, we will review proposed goals and outcomes of the commission. So you should have in front of you a handout that has as its heading, School Financing Review Commission Goals and Outcomes Discussion, and this is a draft document for the purposes of this discussion here today. And what we did in terms of preparing for this meeting was really went back to discussing what is the purpose of this commission and why do we exist. And you can see there are 6 specific reasons under 1A that were given to us from the last legislative session. And those are to, number 1, evaluate the school funding formula for education under TIOSA and make recommendations for adjustments or changes to such a formula that may be necessary to help prevent the increase of property taxes. The second item, and I'm really reading these mainly, I know you know how to read, for anybody who may be listening in or any of our audience members who maybe doesn't have a copy of this. The second point is to regularly review the resources side of the formula under TIOSA. The third point is to regularly review the needs side of the formula under TIOSA. The fourth point is to analyze options for how to minimize the negative impact on schools during times when the state may be unable to fully fund the formula under TIOSA. The fifth point was to analyze the impact of funding for education on student achievement and outcomes, focusing on, but not limited to, access to early childhood education, student attendance, literacy, graduation rate, college going rate, and post-secondary workforce participation. And finally, analyze the impact of funding for education on issues and resources impacting students with relatively high needs, including but not limited to students who live in areas of high concentrations of poverty, students with an individualized education program, and students with limited English proficiency. So not to lose sight of what the goals are that were set for us by the legislature. So the School Financing Review Commission, to the extent it is practical, shall compare findings from subdivision 1A of this section to similar policies from other states. And we'll begin having a conversation on what that looks like later here this afternoon. If you look at page 2 of that particular part of the document, there is a summary of discussion from our August 12th meeting. And you'll see there are 9 points that several of us who were in attendance said, we think these are the things that we discussed in an abundant way at the first meeting. And I put these out there as a point of discussion on, did we capture the thoughts that came out of the first meeting? Are these the thoughts? And are these some of the topics that we want to address as a commission? So do you have this? Do you not have this? Yeah, so it's on the backside. So I won't read through those. I'll let the commission members read through those and think through those. And I'm going to put on my old teacher's hat and exercise some wait time and say, let's have a conversation about these or other topics that we have been missing. Feel free to share your thoughts if anybody's ready, and we can have a discussion as a commission about these points or any others that were discussed on August 12th that didn't get captured here.
I'll speak since nobody else is. I think you did a really good job of capturing so much of what was also a 3 to 4 hour meeting. That's hard to summarize down into 9 bullet points or 8 bullet points. We did a really good job of that. Just a couple things that I noticed as I worked through there that I really liked. In the first and the third bullet points, just about stability, predictability, confidence, and trust. I think that's really almost a guiding light for this commission in some ways, just trying to find those words between our state, our local education associations, our schools. So just trying to create some stability and predictability while also increasing that confidence and trust. Another thing I noted on there is just the balance of sustainable funding. I think that was something that really came out of the last meeting, is what is the correct balance between state and local resources. I'm excited for that discussion, where it goes. Then I noted on the last one, just about trying to find the data points that we really believe are the most important, or the one that is going to guide our discussions moving forward, and hopefully centering around those, not only as a commission, but maybe as we're providing recommendations as well to the legislature. So I just say well done on really capturing a lot of information from the last meeting.
Thank you, Dr. Plas. And there'll be, I think, ample time today to talk about that balance of sustainable funding. And so hopefully we'll get to that actually in our next topic. So thank you for those comments.
We're just going to keep this mic busy over here. You know, at the conceptual level, I think there's a lot of overlap between what's in statute and where the conversation landed. The elements that are on the backside of the document are maybe a little bit more granular. And, you know, some of those items, to Aaron's point, you know, figuring out what that balance is, that was a part of the original commission when they did their work. If I recall from Brian Halstead's presentation, it was a 45% statewide funding target. You know, having some of those more granular objectives laid out allows you to work backwards. If you know what your target is, you have the ability to think about how to hit that target with different models that you're discussing. And then to Aaron's point, it also was really nice to see the language in there captured around, you know, things like sustainability, predictability, stability, trust. Again, I think those dispositional characteristics are things that we're really striving for.
Thank you. Any other comments on any of these particular topics?
Is the desired outcome to adopt goals, or are these just general guidelines? What's the objective?
I think it's whatever this commission wants, actually. I think we're going to need some goals to shoot toward as a commission. Otherwise, I think we're going to do a lot of talking and maybe not get anywhere. So I think if we're going to do anything as a commission that makes sense to the legislature, I think we're going to have to zero in on some goals as we go.
Because I do think that maybe at our first meeting, by getting a little bit more granular and on task, we maybe went beyond the scope of the legislative charge. And so I do think that's a reflection point we need to think about, is what's spelled out in statute is to evaluate, review, analyze, where we kind of jump to a setting of standard of policy. And I know we're not necessarily the policy makers, the senators are, and I wouldn't want to overreach. So I just am curious if there's a little bit of a gap between what we were charged with in state statute and then some of the charge that we gave ourselves, and if anybody else noticed that reflection point.
I think you're right, and I think that's the needle that we're trying to thread. Mm-hmm. How do we come up with some solutions without having the authority to actually implement any of those solutions?
Right. Make a comment.
Please.
Thank you. Yeah, I very much appreciate the items that came from that discussion, and I think to Ms. Standish's point, we've got to balance this needle of, thread the needle of what this commission is going to do. Of course, the legislature is the overall policymaker, but I think it would be good, and I know we're running into short time, right, with this first year that we've got, at least a few guidelines or goals, whatever we want to call those, that we can take back to the body and say, you know, maybe these 3 things we as a commission would recommend any legislation going forward with school funding would maybe fit under the umbrella of. So, you know, what is our potential overall goal for the amount of funding, local versus other entities? You know, if one is for specific to bring levies closer together, that's a huge umbrella, right? But that gives some guidance to the legislative body that they can say, hey, on a school funding potential bill, does it follow under some of the goals that the commission represented? So I think we can marry both, and I think that is what the legislative body is hopefully looking for, and will unite the body potentially on future legislation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I think just to kind of add on to Senator Hughes's point, I'm less concerned with the commission creating policy that it's recommending. I don't think anyone's under the illusion that this commission is able to create statute on its own, or at all, rather. And the legislature, like with its treatment of many commissions that exist for multiple subjects around the state, is free to take recommendations. It's free to take the information from this or not. But I actually think there's value from a legislative side to have some of these policy questions thought through and at least answered and addressed by this group. And then for the legislature to be able to take that information in when it is creating its policy, if it does so. So I think I lean more toward the side of venturing into the space of what this commission would imagine its preferred policy solutions to be, understanding that this commission cannot create those policies.
The only thing that I would add to the comments earlier is maybe not so much a caution that we would perceive that we're policy making, but maybe we're not a broad enough representative group to establish tax policy broadly for the state of Nebraska. We're really a TIOSA study group. So to reach clear towards where the policy conversation that would be all-inclusive of state voices, I think there'd be a number of voices missing at the table from different industry perspective or all sorts of perspectives across the state, where I see the statutory language is a little bit more narrowly focused on the TIOSA in general. So just one caution that we're not an all-inclusive, we're more of that education, school finance voice when we're thinking about if we're going to propose a major tax shift in the state, there would be lots of other voices at the table that would need to have representation.
And if I may, and so I appreciate that, and I completely agree, and I think that's, I think that's important to keep in mind, but also that when we get to the point of if the legislature were to take anything from this and attempt to turn it into actual statute and actual policy of the state, we will have an opportunity for the legislative process, which allows for anyone and everyone to participate, to come forward to those hearings, and to express their positions and opinions as it works through a committee and then full legislative process. So I think that it's always important to keep that in mind, that this is certainly not representative of all the voices that, or stakeholders that would have thoughts about this, but that before anything becomes law, there is an opportunity for all of those voices to engage in the process. And I think that's what brings me comfort in our ability to proceed. And again, not setting policy, but making recommendations related to policy. But I completely agree.
Other comments or clarification? I'm not hearing any additions. I'm hearing a little bit of cautionary tale, which is why we put sheet 1 together of here's what the legislature asked us to do. And I think we've got to be careful not to lose sight of that. But I think it's wise to think through, we need to give the legislature something. So what might that be, Senator Meyer?
I guess one point of discussion that I would like to see this
commission undertake sometime, and we might need some more background information from the department. And part of the school funding formula, total school funding picture, is the net option enrollment program. And as I see that, I guess I have enough gray hair to know, I know when that program started and the intended outcome of that program. And as the size of the dollars spent on that program has increased exponentially to today, I think we're somewhere between 125 and 150 million dollars, which is a significant amount. But as I look at the goals and outcomes discussion, there's some of the things happening with that program that run counter to what our goals should be, especially number 5, when we look at the impact of funding for educational student achievement and outcomes. To me, there's a dilemma there that maybe we are not following through on that with the net option program. And I guess I would like to see, have the goals of that program changed since it was initially formed, and what has been the progress of that as far as the dollars spent per student and the total dollars spent and where they're spent. I do think that's a significant amount of money, and it has led to some pretty large inefficiencies as we look across Nebraska, and whether that's something that this commission wants to look at as a small part of the equation for controlling some costs, or if we're willing to just say it's operating okay in Nebraska, we're not going to undertake that. So however that might look, I think we would need a little background information from the department, but I feel that's something that could be looked at as far as controlling costs and efficiencies and quality of educational outcomes.
Good. We can certainly give you the dollar amount spent in terms of whether or not it's meeting the intent. Others around this table might be able to help us answer that.
Has the intent of that program changed over the years from when it was initially started in 1990 or somewhere around there?
Yeah, that's probably a pretty close time frame to the beginning of it. I don't know that the intent has changed. Maybe I'll ask senators or former senators to weigh in. Senator Linehan.
I don't think that, because of term limits and other things, I don't think the legislature really has ever taken a look back at option funding. It should be looked at and studied. And I think that's an excellent idea to have this commission do that. A lot of things in the legislature, and part of this, we have both term limited members and term limited governor. So things happen, and then the people that created it or did it are gone, and nobody else knows it's going on. And I've got a whole long list of things you can discover after being there for a few years. I do agree with both Senator Bostar and Senator Hughes that I don't think we should think we need to be limited here. The legislature will take or not take or do whatever. And Senator Hughes, you were the author of this legislation, I believe. So I think you would agree that the legislature is starved for information because they do not have the time to study all these issues as much as we will. I think, so I think we should proceed. I do think, though, to Ms. Danish's point, maybe we should have goals that are from now to December 1 and goals after December 1. I don't think we're going to get a whole lot of answers done by December 1, but I do think we can look more deeply and broader after that deadline. So maybe if we stuck our goals are like short-term, long-term.
I want to assure everybody listening and everybody in this room and everybody around this table that Senator Linehan and I have not spoken since the last meeting. However, I would like to go to the 7th item on the agenda, and I've put together some thoughts on how we might be able to do that. So, Senator Linehan, I couldn't agree with you more, and I would tell you that as you look through the document entitled School Financing Review Commission Proposed Process and Plan for Commission Activities, draft document for discussion purposes, underlined three-step process for commission activities. I thought, how do we get from a point of discussing what should we be talking to a point where we're actually saying we need to take some steps in this particular area? And I've used the, and by the way, there's no pride of authorship here, so if this is not a good idea, let me know that, but let's come up with a better idea. So you can't just say this is a bad idea. You have to tell me what a better idea would be. But step one, I think, goes to really meeting a deadline that's set for us on December 1. We have to have a report to the legislature on what the commission has accomplished so far. And after today, we'll be halfway through with the meetings prior to that December 1 meeting. So I would really like to see us focus on the Nebraska school funding facts between now and December 1. We'll have presentations today from Bryce Wilson on a couple of different areas that I think take us down that path. Under the activities, I think we can identify the percents of local, state, and federal funding for recent years. For discussion purposes, we can identify a group of school districts to compare funding facts. For example, if you're wondering what I'm thinking about there, I'm talking about funding distribution percentages and other factors like levies when we talk about bringing those closer together. Review what other states are doing from a school funding model and formula perspective, and then also establish a state funding distribution target. You saw earlier from the previous meeting that we were talking about what's appropriate, having the state fund all of education, 50% of the education costs, what's the right number? It would be nice, I think, if we could, going into the next legislative session, giving the legislature a target that they can consider, and it would be my thought that we can accomplish all of this for the report that is due December 1st. That's one piece. The second piece would be, what can we do during the next calendar year? What can we get done? I think we can really get into more of a long-term planning process, and what proposed revisions can we look at? And I put 3 items under that particular topic. One is to develop an iterative process with working groups within this commission. 2, to develop a revised school funding model concept. And 3, to conduct some of those modeling activities that come from those concepts. And our deadline then would be next November of 2026. So we would have a little more time. We'd have another legislative session. We'd have a lot more conversations to work through. And then finally, in the 2027 calendar year and beyond, we can really sustain what we've put in place. The activities would be the ongoing management of the plan. So hopefully we wouldn't have the, whatever we've had here, a 5 or 10 year no contact, if you would, clause where all the little moves that we make to TIOSA really put us to a place that nobody ever really intended. And so how do we manage that process year over year? And we have that ongoing maintenance to make annual recommendations to the legislature with the goal of maintaining or managing that plan relative to the established school financing objectives. So, and our deadline for that report is annually on November 1st, as stated in statute. So that's a template, I think, for us to really begin talking about what are some of the things we'd like to see done by December 1. Again, I don't know that this is all inclusive. I don't even know if this is even good, but I thought we should start talking about something. And I did think it was good, or I wouldn't put it in front of you. So, thoughts on the concept, and then thoughts on the details within the concept.
I would just say, I think the way you have it chunked seems very logical to me. This is a complicated topic, and it's really important that we ground ourselves in facts so that as we have conversations, we're not debating things that aren't factual in nature. You know, I heard a really great phrase just earlier today, and I'm going to throw the word legislate, but I think make recommendations could easily apply the same. We want to be careful not to legislate by anecdote or make policy recommendations by anecdote. We should really ground those things in facts. And I think this is a complicated topic that would be good for us to ground ourselves in facts as a basis or a foundation for some of those more complicated conversations about what to change.
So I want to just mention, from now till December 1st, which is a pretty short window, I like that you've left it up to, it's kind of an overall picture of what is our funding level. That's what we're going to look at. What is state, what's federal, not that we have control over that, but what's state versus local. We're not going to get in the weeds. I am very happy that, I almost called you Senator Meyer. Mr. Meyer brought forward the option enrollment. I think that is something that is out there that hasn't been delved into. Probably not going to happen between now and November 1st, of course, but I think that could be, tacked on to a next year thing or, ongoing. But I like that it's a high level and then we can more get into the weeds as we go. But let's try to accomplish something that we know we can, and I think that what you've laid out is possible. And it will be helpful. It'll be helpful for the legislative body. I have gotten, again, I almost called you Senator Linehan, Ms. Linehan, mentioned that with turnover, there is a frustration, and it doesn't apply just to education. Tell me about judiciary things. To get in the weeds of that is just so beyond my scope. We only have so much capacity, and there's 49 senators, and so any little bit can help. And I think this is very doable and pretty specific, so I think that's a nice thing to target. And then, again, we can more get into the weeds, down into the individual numbers and things in the next session. So, thank you.
Commissioner, I would also concur with Senator Hughes. I appreciate that we're rooting ourselves in the data, especially when we look at bullet point 2 for the discussion purposes. I think there's a laundry list of things, of data that we could be looking at: levies, net option enrollment, student achievement. I appreciate that we're identifying some of those items, and they may fall under to the next calendar year, but I think rooting ourselves into the data is a wise first step, so thank you.
I would maybe just add, the third bullet point in the first step is certainly looking at what other states are doing. I don't know that there's a perfect model out there, and it starts with the premise that the model we have is any worse or better than anybody else's. But the one thing I've oftentimes seen with funding models and formulas is that as they put them in place, it becomes very unwieldy to change those. So I imagine having staff try to evaluate some of these outside state kind of models, better understanding if they had the opportunity to do over again, how would they modify and change those, might give us a lot of insight into what specifically might we do differently as we start to do some modeling, not to mirror what others have done, but what others would do if they had the opportunity to start all over again as well. So just add that.
That's a point well taken. It amazes me the number of states that I see that are having similar conversations to what we're having right now. It's kind of like when you buy a blue Chevy and you drive around and you see nothing but blue Chevys. I'm starting to see a lot of states that are having similar conversations. So I don't know that a perfect model exists, but I think maybe it would behoove us to look at it and look at it with a grain of salt.
I wonder if it's possible to kind of meld these two things together, because I agree with the original goals, which was the intent of the legislature with the 6 goals that we have, and I also agree with this 3-step process. So I wonder if under each of those goals is where we start to create action plans that kind of ties all this together. And if we know that between now and December 1, what is going to be our action plan, which I think we've at least started to identify with what you put together, but we can put those under each of those 6 goals, and we can just provide the legislature with that information. This is our goal. We're going to evaluate the funding formula. This is how we're doing this between now and December 1st. Obviously, after December 1, we can come back together and say, what are our goals for 2026 under each of those? What are our action items under each of those goals? So trying to blend these 2 things together, in my eyes, makes the most sense.
Thank you.
I have one concern going forward. We're looking at personal property tax relief, and, every time something's come out, it's almost taxing the same people that are paying the personal property tax, with sales or repairs or, whatever, and that's a concern. And the other thing is, and I don't know how many acres it is, but several of the biggest landowners in the state are people that don't live in the state. And so if we take that personal property tax away from them, that means the people that live in the state are going to have to pick up that slack. And the other thing is bringing the levies closer together. There's certain communities that have built the community and invested to help, make things better. And the other thing we got to keep in mind is there's several schools that, there's parochial schools in their district, and so that school doesn't spend as much on public education, but there's people in that district that are paying for 2 schools.
Yeah, thank you for that. Could you tell me a little bit more? I think I'm interested in the concept of and I don't want to, I'm asking because I don't want to draw conclusions from your remarks. So you brought up challenges of lowering the property taxes because it could benefit landowners who don't reside in Nebraska. So if you have more thoughts around that, I would appreciate hearing them. And then I think, personally, I think that it's sort of imperative that we bring the levies across the state closer. And you touched on that and about community investment. And so I would like to hear more about your thoughts related to that. So to those 2 things, I would like to hear more, if you wouldn't mind.
Well, in my opinion, the average student cost in the state, they're reasonably close. I mean, there's a couple thousand difference depending where you're at. So if this community, has got some investment in big plants or whatever, there's more dollars invested there, but their levy's lower, but we're still taking the same amount of money as some that don't have as much money invested. Like for Columbus, for instance, ADM is a big plant there. There's several other ones, but there's been tax write-offs for them to get started there that the people in that area invested in and paid extra to have that in their community. And now they're paying the taxes, and if the cost per student is $14,000 per student, across the state, the average is all pretty close to that. So every district and every area is playing just a matter of how you get your dollars. Some get it from state funding, if their levy gets up to that $1.05. If your levy's lower, you don't get any of that state funding unless it's special ed or something like that. And the other thing, some of the landowners that have invested in Nebraska land because of whatever reason, they either rent it out and then their renters pay a rent, but they don't come here and buy products. And, so if we cut personal property tax, that'd be beneficial to them, in my opinion.
other comments on the draft document and a plan to do something short-term, midterm, and long-term?
I'd just add one more thing, and something I've heard Senator Hughes say a few times on the floor as she was talking about LB 303 is just the power of step 3. It's a lifestyle choice. You know, one of the things I've heard her mention is that, 20 years ago or so, just short of 20 years ago, a lot started to change around the formula, and we weren't necessarily actively managing it. And we've gotten to a spot where there's a need for some additional conversations now. What I like about step 3 is if we make the positive assumption that step 1 and 2 are going to lead us to a place that we feel good about, step 3 allows us to stay there over time as many variables change in the world around us. And I just think that's a really powerful piece of your plan, Dr. Maher.
I'm almost ready to proceed with the plan. Okay. I think what we're going to do at this point is move off of item 7 and move on to item 8 and ask Bryce Wilson to come forward and present to us. Bryce is really going to talk to us about a couple of items. One is he's going to give us a little more information on TEOSA so that we all understand it a little better, but he's also going to follow up on some of the questions that were raised at the previous meeting regarding some trend data that we have. Bryce, I really thought you'd walk up here a lot faster than that. That's all I had prepared. Welcome.
Good afternoon. Actually, before I get going on the TEOSA slideshow, going to go through, I think you all have a handout of some of the, we have them titled School Financial Review Commission Reports, or I think we actually changed the name on there, but some of the data that was asked for or referenced, requested the last time that we met. I'm going to just go through it kind of in the order it's there, but I think it kind of gets to some of the questions that we discussed at the last meeting. So attachment A starts out, one of the big questions was, what was the 5-year history of funding for school districts in our state as far as the breakout between local, county, state, federal breakout. So we put together some charts there to show from 2019-20 through 2023-24 of actual data. So we have 5 years of data as reported to us on the annual financial reports. And you can go back and see in the 1920 year that we were locally funded at almost 56%. It stayed pretty even there for 1920 through 22-23. So for 4 years there, 55% of our school funding was locally funded. The state funding portion was around 34 to 37% in those 4 years. 23-24, we start to see things change a little bit there, and that you see the local percentage of funding for school districts drop to 51%, and the state portion jumped up to 38%. The other thing I'd note too in there is there's about a 3% change in funding when the ESSER funds from the federal government came, and pushed their funding up from about 5% to 8%. And that starts to show up in the 21-22 fiscal year. So those 5 years, things are those first 4 years were very consistent. And then 23, 24, the changes there was LB 583 that introduced the foundation aid and the increased special education funding that started to show up to schools in their 23, 24 information. That was the start of the shift to school districts. What's not showing, and I'm not exactly sure which year it was, if it was 22, 23 or somewhere around there, when the income tax credit that we all received on our tax returns when we filed them for the school taxes paid and the community taxes paid, that's not reported in here because school districts didn't report that to us. Individuals paid the taxes to schools. It showed up as a local payment, even though they were getting reimbursed in credits from the state when they filed their tax returns. So 23, 24, and I think 22, 23, at least those 2 years, and I wasn't able to come up with that number, need to have that reflected as well, or at least have that understanding. For 24, 25, because there was considerable conversation about really wanting to see the 24, 25 numbers when we made when legislature made the change to add the school tax credit up front, so taxpayers were no longer paying that, and they're having that reduced from their property tax payments. I was able to pull together the revenues that we know of and estimate for schools what 24, 25 looks like, to the tune of about 89% of the revenue that school districts will get. So a good chunk of it we were able to pull and figure out with Sarah's help, getting the property tax credit, the homestead exemption, and the school tax credit amounts in there. You'll see a significant change in 24, 25, what that looks like. So I just want to make sure that that's pointed out. The local percentage drops to almost just under 38% with the change of the school tax credit being added there. The state portion jumps up to 52.6%. So those amounts almost flip-flopped significantly. So that is a big change. And I think that was one of the numbers you guys were very curious to understand what that might look like. Again, those are estimated. I just want to make sure that that's clear. We don't have that data, won't have that data finalized until December, maybe even January before it's ready to be released. But it gives you a pretty good estimate there when we have about 90% of that revenue known. So if you flip over.
Hey, Bryce, could I ask a question on it? This is really, really great, first of all. I think this is really helpful, and it shows a lot of progress that's been made. If you look at the federal line of 1920, and you look at the federal line of 22, 23, 23, 24, 24, 25, if we assume those are inflated because of ESSER funds, and we back down those to what would be typically normal levels, which is probably somewhere between 4.5% and 5.5%, would it be an accurate inference that the state number would go up by 1.5%, and the local number would go up by 1.5%, and the state number would go up by 2% or so? So you'd be somewhere in the 54, 55% state funded and 38, 39% local?
For the 24, 25 estimated year, I would say that's probably a pretty good-ish number for 24, 25, yep. Yes.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Thank you for doing this. On the 22, 23, so I think it was 548 million that went out in tax credit. That's how much money was available. So that's not in this chart?
That is not.
Okay.
It would actually be showing up under the local portion, is because it would have been paid by taxpayers and received by school districts in the local portion.
Okay. And that was, okay. So it's actually, the state did better in 22, 23 than this shows, and in 23, 24. But now, with the new, I think now it's 750 million, because now that it goes out, they had to make sure, even if you didn't claim it, you're getting it. So now this, the 24, 25 is 750 million plus 60% of the other credit. I call it credit one. I don't.
Oh, the property tax credit is
Yes.
the other credit, yes. So the state line would include the homestead exemption, so all the portions paid by the state that get reduced, a person's property tax bill, so homestead exemption, property tax credit, and the school tax credit, which is the new one.
Okay. Okay. Thank you very much. This is excellent.
I think, so if no other questions, and again, feel free to stop me with other questions. Flipping over to the backside of that then, I think just kind of the next step in talking about what does that look like is what does the property tax from the local sources actually look like? And we threw together there a 10-year history so you could see the percentage of, when we just focus on the property taxes paid by the local taxpayer, what does that look like? What are those increases year to year? And it went through 23, 24. Because we don't have finalized confirmed data, I was a little hesitant to put 24, 25 on your sheet there, the handout, but I do have those estimated numbers. So what you'll notice is 22, 23, the amount is kind of the high water mark there of $2.3 billion paid by the local taxpayers. 23, 24, you see that start to decrease, again, with the LB 583 money of foundation aid and special education funding being added to school districts' sources of revenue. It dropped to 2.3. It dropped down just a little under 0.5%. But 24, 25, when we use the estimated numbers there to come up with the 24, 25 data that I used for the last pie chart on the other page there, is just under $1.7 billion. So that's a pretty significant, over $600 million decrease in local property taxes paid there with the school tax credit coming in. Again, the 22, 23, and 23, 24 numbers don't incorporate that income tax credit that was actually reimbursed on the individual's income tax statements. But 26% decrease is what 24, 25's numbers look like in my estimated math. So I think, obviously, that's a very significant change. Continuing on, and again, stop me, I'm moving through this pretty fast, but another one of the questions I think brought up was, what does Nebraska's funding structure look like as far as local, state, federal compared to other states? We were able to pull 11 other states kind of in the vicinity, states that we thought maybe were comparable states in some regard, in some fashion. So there's 11 states there where you can see how did they fund the local, state, federal portion. When we rolled up and averaged those other 11 states, their local funding percentage average was 43%. So Nebraska, compared to what the average was for those other 11 states, we would have been significantly higher than that prior to 24, 25. Now we're actually, our local percentage is below that, since it's now dropped down to about 30, 37, 38%. State portion for those 11 other states averaged 42%, and the federal portion was 15%, which is significantly higher, almost double what Nebraska gets for the federal portion. So I'm not necessarily going to dive into any of those specific states, but I wanted you guys to have that information there so you could look at it and see kind of what the averages were. Yeah, absolutely.
On the, you said, yeah, so you said the average for federal for the group of states you got was around 12, 13%, whatever. Do you just offhand why so much more than Nebraska?
Yeah. So one of the things we continue to see with our federal funding is our percentage continues to go down compared to other states because our poverty and low-income students are, well, they're actually, we're increasing in poverty and low-income students as well, but not as fast as the other states. And so they distribute that based on poverty numbers, and they're growing, their poverty is growing faster than ours, and so they get bigger percentages.
Thank you.
And it was probably on steroids because your ESSER funds were based upon your Title I allocation.
Yep.
So it almost had a doubling effect.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
When going through these, did you happen to ID what states collect a state property tax?
I did see that data somewhere, and I can't remember off the top of my head.
I can look my own too.
Yeah, there was very few. I think there was maybe only 2 or something like that. It was very minimal. Again, continuing on, we had the conversation last meeting as well about general fund levy information. So attachment D, page 7 of the handouts there, we went through and just looked at it, did a 5-year, went back to 2000, 2001, and did a 5-year picture every year to see in a breakout of what levies were For those 5 years up to 2024-25, which is the most recent data that we have, it's a pretty interesting change over that period, but it's a very consistent change and probably pretty easily to identify that valuation growth is contributing to that in some regard at least. But in 2000-2001, there was only one district that had a levy under 74 cents. Almost 92% of the districts were at 95 cents or greater for their general fund levy. This is just general fund levy information, so it doesn't include the other 3 taxing funds, just general fund. We focused on that. And you'll see over each of those different 5-year jumps, those trends and those changes continue to move down lower and lower. So by 24-25, we had all but 20 districts were below 95 cents. So it's almost a complete flip of the general fund levy numbers there. And we have now around almost 60% of the districts are below 74 cents in their general fund levy. So with 33 of those below 50 cents and 0 of them above $1.05 now. So there's been a significant lowering of overall general fund levies, and I think somewhat of a closing of that gap in some regard. Yeah.
One of the reasons that maybe we were all at $1.05 back in 2000, 2001, which 25 years ago and closer to the original TIOSA, was because if you weren't at $1.05, you didn't get equalization.
So.
I mean, because I'm trying to remember the gentleman that came to, he may be here, because some schools were keeping it $1.05 because.
I'm glad you brought that up. I was going to mention that and I forgot. So you'll see a big shift between 2010-11 and 2015-16. So what happened there was what Senator Linehan is mentioning is there used to be a component in the TIOSA formula called the minimum levy adjustment. If you were below 95 cents in your general fund, you essentially got dinged on how much equalization aid your district could get. It didn't necessarily take it all away from you, although it may have depended on how far below 95 cents you were. But in that time period between, I don't remember the exact year, but between 10-11 and 15-16, they did away with that minimum levy adjustment. And I can affirm by working with school districts and their budgets, there were a ton that were holding their budgets at 95 cents trying to avoid that minimum levy adjustment. Once that went away, their levies went down significantly, and the numbers in districts below 95 cents increased significantly at that time.
Which is a good example of unintended consequences.
Yep. Just continuing on through the data here, and again, I know there's a lot to look at, and you guys can continue to digest it and ask questions as they come up, but just kind of showing you that levy gap each year of those 5 years. We have the high and the low levies listed for 2001 to match up with those pie charts we just said through 24-25. And you'll see in 2001 we had a district at $1.39, and the lowest levy was 73 cents, whereas in 2024 where the highest levy in the state was just under $1.05, with the lowest being at a little over 31 cents. Any questions on any of the levy information? Or one more data set here to go through with you real quick. And that's the general fund expenditures. I think too, as we're digesting all this information, looking at what general fund expenditures have been historically as part of this picture as well. And so you can see there, we went back 2002, 2003, and showed what general fund expenditures have been. You'll notice that the 20-year average was at 5.46, and it continues to decrease every 5 years. So by the last 5 years, the average general fund expending has grown 3.65% per year.
Bryce, could I ask you to do something with that one? I think there's different ways that this can be calculated, and it looks like what we did there is we took the 4.4 billion minus the 2.1 billion and divided by 20. So it's not taking into account the fact that those are compounding numbers. And so just with a little bit of napkin math, I think your 20-year average is closer to 3.8, 15 years, 3.4, 10 years, 3.6, and 5 years, 3.8. And all 4 of those years, those groupings are all pre-COVID, post-COVID. So they're all elevated by ESSER funds. So I think 2 things that I would recommend is what would the average annual budget growth have been to make those numbers work and not have it compound. So those are bigger numbers than what the annual budget growth would have been. And the reason your 20-year is higher is because the compounding effect gets bigger the further out you go. And then the other piece that I would say, just knowing we're looking at pre versus post-COVID with ESSER funding, that's $200 million, is if you extract that $200 million out, how much is your budget growth? And I think those 2 things combined are going to give us a more accurate picture of what is year-over-year average budget growth been in Nebraska. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I understand what you're saying.
Bryce, this is for everyone and other people who were in the legislature or currently in the legislature. Please speak up if I'm wrong here, but I think when the Appropriations Committee, at least they did originally, I don't know where they are now, or when I was there, not originally, the Appropriation Committee assumed school funding would go up 4.5% a year. That's what they used in like 18, 19, 19, 20, when they tried to figure out what TIOSA was going to be. Does that not ring a bell with you?
I guess it changes. They've done it different ways. They've used historical spending to do their out-year models for sure, but
Well, I think maybe when there was a change on the Appropriation Committee, they went to a different kind, they didn't go the 4.5, but when I first got there, 2017, it was 4.5 they used. So that would be safe, which is what the Appropriations Committee did. Can we go, I have another comment just because, I'm sorry, who talked about some towns have parochial schools? I can't see down there. I know who.
Mr. Runge brought that up.
Okay. It's interesting here because on your chart of the lowest levies, you've got Humphrey, which I think half the kids in Humphrey are in private schools. You've got Elgin, which I think half the kids in Elgin are in private schools. So that does, to his point, affect some levies. Thank you.
I just have a quick comment on, I think it's your second set of, when you're comparing across the various states, the pie charts that you have. So it's great data. I wonder how difficult it would be to do that where you weight that against the total student populations in those states, just for comparison purposes. I think we're going to get to the point we're going to be evaluating different state models, the ones that align probably most closely based on the overall size of the state and the population there. They would just contextually it'd help us into the future as we look back at these documents, which I think provide a lot of really good context to things. So that's the only comment I'd make.
Comment I'd like to make is if we're only looking at levies, states do use different methods to determine valuation also. So somehow it'd be good to take that into account. For instance, some states, I think, value only a certain percentage of the valuation for tax purposes. And I'm not sure exactly, commercial, housing, residential, agricultural, how that breaks down between states, but I know there is differences. But I appreciate these comparisons. It gives us a good idea on what other states do, at least some idea. Thanks.
I'd like to throw out a caution on Wyoming, because I've looked at their funding. They can't remember if they have property taxes, they don't have income taxes, and a lot of their revenue comes from, what, mineral?
Oil and gas.
Oil and gas and minerals, so they're, we just, to your point, Senator Merman, you got to be careful when you compare states because the funding, it says state, but it's not people who live there. It's people, because as same as in Nebraska and every state, and this is, I'm sure everybody here understands it, but it's confusing for a lot of people. Just because you don't live in a state, if you make money in that state, you pay their state income taxes. So if I own property in Nebraska, which generates revenue for me, I pay Nebraska taxes on that revenue.
And along those lines, I guess it would be interesting to have at least some kind of breakdown under what those state sources are. In other words, if they're getting the majority of that from local property taxes versus state sales taxes versus state income tax, I think that'd be really helpful because that underscores and some discussions that have been had in the legislature, how to change those percentages to maybe be more equitable to be able to lower the property tax. In other words, the sales tax revenue, some of these states I know have 7, 8, 9% sales tax over a broad base. So just because it's a state source, would need to be able to dig into that a little bit deeper to know if we're talking about property taxes or a state income tax or sales tax, because that's a big difference. I don't think it would be too hard to get those somewhat kind of breakdowns, but it.
We can
I
work
would
on
be
it.
over there working with Sarah on that one.
It sounds like it wouldn't be very hard for you or me at all. Thanks, Sarah. Thanks, Bryce. Other questions or comments on this particular part of the presentation?
Just a quick clarification. I'm getting a flashing red at me. Oh, there we go. Now we're green. Attachment C. Bryce, you said that the federal funding for the state of Nebraska has decreased over the course of time, correct? Based on Title I and things of that nature, our student population isn't increasing as much as other states are, but it's still increasing, right? Our free and reduced student populations and all those types of things. I just want to make sure that that point's clear. Like, our student population is not getting any easier to educate, but the federal funding sources are reducing, and so something has to pick that up, even if it were just a flat line. It's not a flat line, it's getting more expensive, so the state and/or local has to pick that up in order to make that happen.
I just wanted to say thank you. That was a lot of work in 6 weeks to get done, and this is really excellent data. So thank you to you and your team for all that you did to provide that.
Absolutely.
Bryce, does that conclude that portion of your presentation? Why don't we take a break? That way, if anybody needs to have a sidebar, you can do that. Let's take a break. We'll come back in 10 minutes. That'll be 2:23 on my clock. This is your 1-minute warning. You got 1 minute. Well, welcome back. We will we'll get into the last part of the meeting here with the concluding portions of the presentation from Bryce Wilson. Bryce.
All right, after talking about numbers for the last 20 minutes and talking about numbers, continuing on with numbers, I feel like I should ask if anybody heard the joke about the interesting and exciting accountant. Yeah, me neither. All right, so TIOSA, we're going to jump in, and I'm just going to start. I think the best way to go through TIOSA, I know a lot of times it gets the reputation for being complex, and it is, and I think complex because we have 244 different situations in our state. So in some regards, at least it's that it has to be to take care of all of our districts. But it's easiest to start kind of high level and work our way down into the details a little bit. And so we are going to get down into the details a little bit today, but I'm going to start at the high and we'll work our way down. So just I guess remembering that the TIOSA is the Tax Equity and Educational Opportunity Support Act. And it is the largest piece of funding going out to our school districts from the state. And so I think just starting there, and we kind of hit on that the last time as well, so I won't jump too much further down that path. But understanding that when a lot of times you hear the term, our school doesn't get any state aid, what they're really talking about is equalization aid. So all public school districts in our state get state aid. And the basic concept behind TIOSA was needs minus resources equals equalization aid. Now, what oftentimes, as we talked about again the last meeting, is the majority of our school districts are no longer equalized school districts, so they're not getting that equalization aid piece. But the formula is also changed to include other funding sources in the formula, we'll get to, that still provide aid to every school district in our state. And the basic concept behind that too is to make sure that the districts that don't have resources in place to cover their needs, the state kicks in and covers that gap. So I think that's an important part to understand about equalization aid. When we talk about TIOSA, there's really three driving forces that significantly impact the formula. Two of them on the needs side of the calculation and one on the resource side of the calculation. Formula students is one of the need drivers of the formula. And when we say formula students, there's a lot of different ways that we look at students in school districts. TIOSA has its own unique way, and it's called formula students, and it looks at the kids that are in, the students who are in grades K through 12. And then we also take the students that are in pre-K educational programs that are 4, and just recently we also added 5-year-olds in, but they're only counted at 60% of a full-time equivalent FTE. So they're not counted as a full FTE like the kids in K through 12. I like to say this because they're a little bit shorter than everybody else, but I don't know if that's the real reason for that. We account students that are contracted to another district as well in a district's formula student count. The second driver of formula need is spending. General fund operating expenditures, the terminology we use for it, but it's really school district spending. It's the revenues and expenses that come off of a school district's annual financial report, and it's what drives most of the need calculations in TIOSA. And then the big driver on the resource side is, of course, valuations. And it's each district's, basically that shows a district's ability to pay locally as far as the formula recognizes. Jumping into needs a little bit further, so again, taking that next step down into the detail of the formula, there are 5 different kinds of categories of needs. So when we measure needs of a school district, there's a total of 17 different functions or components of formula needs, but those 17 components are made up of 5 categories. Basic funding being the most significant one, and I'll jump into how that's calculated in a second, but it's an average of the districts around you in an array, and arrays are determined by the number of students that you have in your district. So the districts that are the closest to you in the number of students will be the districts that you are averaged with. Allowances are specific district spending that is recognized in the formula and then pulled out of basic funding. So a lot of times people think, hey, we have the poverty allowance, and we'll jump into what those different allowances are. We have several, but things like poverty allowance, if we increase the poverty allowance, that doesn't increase the amount that the state has to pay. That reduces the amount of basic funding going out to schools, because what it does is allowances recognize expenses that school districts already are incurring or in the spending numbers, and it directs those needs. Instead of averaging them to all the districts in their array, they get pulled directly to the district that's incurring that specific cost. So things like transportation, special education, poverty, limited English proficiency, those are the allowances we'll go through in a little bit. But when TIOSA was written, they essentially wrote those allowances to cover about 85% of that specific need for a district. Basically, the district, you got 15%, you're on the hook for 15%, the state's going to cover 85% of that, is generally how those formulas are written to cover. Adjustments are for needs that a school district may have that aren't yet showing up in the spending numbers. So those are going to be things like student growth adjustments. So if you have a school district that's growing, their spending numbers are going to always be 2 years behind because of when the data rolls in and how we calculate TIOSA. There's a 2-year lag for when we're calculating state aid or TIOSA aid for school districts. And so to get schools up to speed when they're growing, they would struggle to maintain their funding for their school district if we didn't recognize those things early. So student growth, if they build a new school, the funding they need to fill that school and get it up and running wouldn't be in their spending yet. So those are in there. The other adjustment that the state has is this averaging adjustment, which is just for the districts that are larger than 900 students. And then we have corrections. So those things that they're estimating, like they don't actually know how much student growth they're going to have. They have to estimate that. If it's a smaller district, it might be that there's a plant coming in, or it's just a district that's maybe one of our districts right around one of the larger metro areas that tend to be the growing districts. They may have a more historical growth and can estimate that better, but we do come back then and see how did that growth actually turn out. Or there's also the poverty or limited English proficiency. They estimate how much they're going to spend on their poverty plan or their limited English proficiency plan. If they don't meet those spending requirements, we do a correction and we pull back formula need from those districts. So that's what corrections are. And then need stabilization is the last category of needs. Essentially what that does is that holds a district at a high watermark if their needs go down. So if it's a district with declining enrollment and their needs were at, for an example, $2 million, And then the next year, their needs come in at 1.8 million. Need stabilization would kick in and fill that gap and say, okay, your needs stay at $2 million in that scenario. They don't drop down to 1.8 million. On the flip side, it also keeps the district's needs from growing too fast. So unless they have a student growth adjustment, it caps a district's formula needs growth at 112% of the previous year. So they can only essentially grow 12% a year, and wouldn't be able to grow more than that unless they have that student growth adjustment. So
Can I ask a quick question on that stabilization? So the example you gave, going from 2 million to 1.8, how long does that adjustment go to support the district? Is that a 1 year, or is it multiple, or just?
there is no step down or there is no end to it. So they would stay at $2 million indefinitely right now unless their needs ever jumped back up above that amount.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. So we're going to look, basic funding is, I'm going to jump through the need side first here, but the basic funding is a piece that's really important to understand because out of formula needs, there was 4.6 billion. When we certified 25, 26 TIOSA aid to school districts, there was $4.6 billion of needs for all 244 school districts. Out of the 4.6 billion, 3.6 billion of that was basic funding. So obviously it's the lion's share. When you kind of think of a school district educating, it's probably a bad terminology, but I'm going to say just an average normal student with no other transportation, significant costs, or special education, or limited English proficiency, poverty, it's what a school district essentially would need to spend on the normal average student. And so when we calculate basic funding, again, we're averaging, we're going to take an array, and this is highlighting if we were using, in this situation, Allen Consolidated School Districts, we would take the 10 districts that are smaller than them by formula students and the 10 districts larger than them by formula students. If they're below 900 students, we are averaging their total adjusted general fund operating expenditure number. That's the number in the middle column there. We would throw out the highest two spending and the lowest two spending districts, and the remaining 17 are averaged to determine what their basic funding would be in this scenario. If it's a district larger than 900, we're going to use the number in the far right column that's a per student number. We'd do that same averaging where we throw out the highest and the lowest two in that array, and then we'd multiply it by the number of formula students in that specific district. So it's a little different based on whether they're above 900 or below 900. But it's important to understand how basic funding works since it's such a big part of formula need for school districts.
Right.
Yep.
What did you say? 4.6 billion was the total, and then how much is its basic funding?
3.6 billion. The other thing that I would note in there too is just if you're ever looking at all this information on our website, if you're ever looking at this, don't look at the adjusted general fund operating expenditures as a way to identify if a school district is a high spending or low spending school district, because that number takes out all the allowances a school district has, and it's not a good indicator of school district spending. So that oftentimes people come to me and they're like, they have this document and they're saying, well, we have a low spending school district. Well, if your school district has a whole bunch of poverty allowance and limited English proficiency allowance, it's going to show a low adjusted general fund operating expenditure because those are subtracted out. That's getting way far into the weeds, but just know that there's better documents to use to evaluate school district spending, like per pupil cost and general fund operating expenditure. Components of resources then. So resources is much quicker and easier to calculate for us. It's much simpler. There's only these items. Yield from local effort rate is the valuation. It's important to understand there that we are just multiplying the valuation by a hypothetical local effort rate so that everybody's on the same playing field. So it doesn't matter if a school district has a 30-cent levy for this calculation or a $1.05 levy. Everybody's getting multiplied by the dollar basic or the local effort rate unless that's changed by legislature. That's one of the common levers that legislatures use to change the amount of TIOSA funding. Net option funding came up earlier today. That is for districts that have more kids optioning into their district than optioning out of their district. Then we take the the statewide basic funding per formula student times the number of kids that they're positive. That's how much net option funding each district would get. And that is, it's also, I think, important to note too there, when we talk about pieces of the formula that are paid out to school districts, if they're an equalized school district and this is counted in resources, it doesn't actually increase their funding. So when we look at the total net option funding, for example, it's 120 million. Out of that, just over 100 million of that is going to non-equalized school districts. So that would be the portion that's actually helping school districts out on their TIOSA funding. Allocated income tax, I know this one came up at the last meeting as well. That is for each district gets 2.23% of the income taxes paid in their school district goes back to them as allocated income taxes. Other actual receipts is just identifying the other receipts that the school district has coming into their general fund. So it's going to be things like power district sales tax, fines, licenses, tuition, interest, special education. You can see the rest of the list there, but just those other receipts that are coming in. What you don't see in other actual receipts is donations, grants. Those types of things are not included in there. If they were, that would disincentivize donations and things like that. So those don't hurt school districts when they get a donation from Walmart or their school foundation. Anything like that would not hurt a school district. And then Community Achievement Plan aid is another one of the resources there. Also has an allowance, and that's for the districts in the learning community. It's calculated as a percentage of their poverty and LEP plans that they have in the learning community. And then foundation aid. And important to note in foundation aid, obviously we've already talked about that. That one's a new one that came about 2 years ago. It also changed this current year so that now 900 of the foundation aid is included in the resource calculation, with 600 of it being outside of the resource calculation. So what that essentially means is that equalized school districts will get $600 per student in addition to their equalization aid. A non-equalized school district is going to get the full $1,500 per student, still no change to them.
Bryce, that $600 was meant to offset the special education increases?
Correct.
Would have hurt equalized schools?
Correct. So when, at the same time that shift occurred, the increase in special education funding that happened 2 years ago started showing up in other actual receipts, which would have increased resources for the equalized school districts pushing down their equalization aid. So that was part of the bill that was passed to make sure that equalized school districts continue to get additional funding once that occurred. Sure.
I got a text. Would you please turn your microphone on when speaking? It's as much for the folks who are listening in as it is for the folks in the room. Thanks.
I'm sorry.
Nope.
I'm so loud, I don't usually need a microphone. Can you drill down on the $900, $600, $1,500 a little bit more?
Sure. Let me do it on this next slide.
Okay.
So I was going to put this slide in last time and got told that this was way too much going on, but I get to this time since we're jumping into the weeds a little bit more.
I don't know who could have possibly told you that or why.
There's a lot going on in this slide, and I agree. But this, I think, is a really good visual picture of how TIOSA works once you kind of take a look at it. And it's color-coded very intentionally. So everything in that top box is all of the formula needs of the TIOSA formula. Everything in the middle box is all of the resources, and everything in the bottom box is the total of what we actually pay out to school districts. So it shows what school districts get in addition to equalization aid in that bottom box. And I'll jump in the foundation aid question there, but I'm going to start at the top. The top box shows the green colored box. Well, I'll start with the first one's basic funding. We already jumped into that. The green ones are the allowances. So those are the things that identify the school district specific expenditures that are pulled out of basic funding and directed to the school district that's actually incurring the cost. So that's, you're going to see special receipts allowance there, the poverty allowance, LEP, limited English proficiency allowance, transportation allowance, focus school, summer school allowance, distance education, telecommunication, elementary site allowance, and then community achievement plan. So we've kind of touched on a couple of those, but I think maybe the elementary site, it's helpful to understand that's for school districts that have multiple elementary attendance sites in different cities, different incorporated cities or villages that are more than 7 miles apart. So it's those districts that are very spread out, not in a local metro area, and they're running multiple elementaries at those different sites. Summer school, if it's fun, they can get a summer school allowance if they're providing summer school that's not funded by federal funds, and they're not charging free or reduced students. They get additional units if free or reduced students are attending, or if they're teaching remedial math or remedial reading in that summer school. I think those are maybe some of the biggest things there. I can jump into more in details of those other ones, but in the effort of not keeping everybody here till tomorrow, I'll try to keep moving a little bit. The light blue ones are the adjustments. We talked about the adjustments are the add-ons to formula need that aren't yet showing up in the school district spending numbers. The purple ones were the corrections, which we covered those a little bit, and then the yellow one is need stabilization. So those all make up the formula needs for a school district. The resources, we already just covered those, so I'm not going to jump into that. The bottom box, though, is what I want to spend the rest of the time on this slide talking about, and that is what makes up the actual TIOSA aid that goes out to a school district. And that's a combination of their net option funding, their allocated income tax funds, the community achievement plan aid, 60% of the foundation aid, which is inside the resources, their equalization aid, and then the 40% foundation aid that's outside. And then you see a prior year correction. We get to calculate TIOSA twice a year and update the numbers from kind of estimated numbers, which fall membership is kind of an estimated snapshot in one day. We update and use average daily membership to come up with prior year correction and make sure that the numbers and the student counts are all correct for a school district. But the total of those things is what we actually pay out to a school district each year. Going back to the foundation aid piece and how you see it on here, in the resource side of that calculation in that middle box, 60% of the foundation aid is counted in resources for a school district. So as a school district, if they're equalized, that's going to reduce their equalization aid dollar for dollar. If they're non-equalized, they're going to get that 60%. It's not going to reduce equalization aid because they're non-equalized. They'll also get the 40%. Is that the portion that you're questioning, or is that how the special education funding? Okay, so 900 of that, $900 is the portion inside the resource calculation. 600 is outside the resource calculation. Any questions on this very intense slide? Okay. Well, either I'm doing a really good job explaining or everybody's asleep. So this is what when a school district gets their state aid certified to them, this is what it looks like. So you can kind of see it just in a little different visual format. And these are all, again, out on our website. But it has the top half of it shows their formula needs in each of those categories. Then the formula resources, the first box there is the total formula needs for this school district. And then the middle red box is total formula resources, shows then that in this situation, the total formula resources exceed total formula needs. Therefore, the last third box is their total equalization aid is 0. But you'll also see on there, their total state aid for this district is that's small for me, $3,147,000. So they're still getting significant state aid. Yeah.
Are you going to go into what those other significant state aids are, if it's not equalization or foundation aid?
I think I covered them, so I guess I got not necessarily more,
Okay.
but I can.
Could you, if I go to the annual statewide annual financial report, AFR, it lists all the things that come from the state and all the things that come from local resources, right? So you threw out a minute ago an example of taxes on utilities. Is that a local resource or is that a state resource?
That would be a local resource.
other state resources would be,
Apportionment would be a
Yes.
big one. There's grants, like, for example, they just added the Career and Technical Education State Grant.
just, I think if we just look at if you look at the annual financial report, you can figure out what money's coming from, what's local and what's state and what's federal.
Yep, in the state portion of it, again, would show, like we talked about earlier, it will show the homestead exemption, it'll show the property tax credit, it'll show the school tax credit, are all gonna show up in there.
Okay, thank you very much.
So again, I've covered this, but just another visual of this. If you're a non-equalized school district, does TIOSA still matter? Yep, it does, because you get the net option funding, you get the allocated income tax. If you're in the learning community, you get community achievement plan aid. Foundation aid is a big piece of it now, and then obviously there is equalization aid for those equalized school districts. And then just at the bottom of this chart, you can see there, just noting again, 50 equalized school districts in 25, 26, and 195 non-equalized school districts. So one of the things that happened with foundation aid is because that's a resource, it pushed down the number of equalized districts significantly. It made a pretty big impact on that. This goes back to the question we talked about a little bit earlier too, but it's a common question that still does cause some confusion out there, is does my general fund levy rate have any effect on TIOSA aid? The answer is no, it doesn't, because for two reasons. One, when we look at the valuations that a district has, we use that hypothetical local effort rate that's $1 for every school district. So regardless of what their general fund levy is, we're putting it at $1 to put everybody on a level playing field. The other thing is the minimum levy adjustment that used to exist doesn't exist anymore, and so whatever a school district's general fund levy is does not impact TIOSA. And then this is just when you have more questions about TIOSA and want to know more of the details and the numbers, we have this TIOSA document out on our website, so that you can find more of those informations, or just email and contact me. So that's a really quick run through of TIOSA and how it works more. I know there's a lot more details that go into it, but trying to find a level there where we can all kind of get familiar with it together. Any questions on any of that?
Go ahead. What would be the top 2 or 3 complaints you hear about the formula in your role and as you've worked with the model here in the last few years?
Well, probably the most common is that we're a non-equalized school district. I think schools are very focused on being equalized versus non-equalized. So the fact that we only have 50 equalized school districts is probably the most common thing that I hear. That's a really good question. I'd think about that more. I don't know that I have anything else that's just popping out right now. I'll walk away from here and they'll all come together.
Bryce, would you mind speaking a little bit more to the local effort rate? You said it's currently, that's the hypothetical tax rate. It's currently at $1, but what has that done throughout the course of the last 20 years, or has it always been at $1, or has it changed?
So, good question. It has not always been at $1. It's been up as high as $1.395, which is basically just allowing the 1% the county gets, and not leaving any wiggle room for a school district under the $1.05 max levy. So it's technically in statute, it's 5 cents below the max levy, but statute's been changed to change that from 5 cents to $1.395. It was 99 cents one year, I think. So we went under $1 at one year, but most of the time it's been around $1, and for the last several years it's been at $1. But right around the 2009, 10, 11 time period, for several years there, it was raised.
Why was that typically raised or lowered in different years?
It was raised in years that the state was short funds and was working to balance the budget, is one of the 2 levers that they oftentimes will adjust. And then it came in because The other lever that they oftentimes will adjust is the amount, the allowable growth factor that we grow, because TIOSA uses 2-year-old information. And the most confusing part of TIOSA is what year's data we're using, because it uses 3 different years combinations, but it uses 2-year-old spending data. It moves them forward by an allowable growth rate, which is typically 2.5% a year. So we use 2-year-old growth by 5% for the 2 years to catch up. And in that time period, they had reduced that allowable growth rate to 0 and 0.5% for 2 years there, really pushed it down. And so TIOSA really came in low then, and they lowered the local effort rate to help increase the amount of funding than 1 year or 2.
Thank you.
Quick question for you, Bryce, and former Senator Meyer had asked a question earlier about net option funding, and I thought you did a really nice job talking about that. If you're an equalized district, you don't get paid twice for the same student, correct?
Correct. So if you're an equalized school district, really your funding is going to be an equalization aid, and you're going to get, the kid's going to be in part of your formula student count, driving your basic funding portion of the need. Because the net option funding is counted as a resource, it's a dollar for dollar reduction of your equalization aid.
So the 120 million that you referenced for audited 23-24 financials, if those monies wouldn't have gone for net option, it would have been more equalization aid for districts to a pretty sizable percentage of that, correct?
Correct. So I looked it up just a couple minutes ago here, and it was 101 million went to non-equalized school districts. So about 20 million went to reduced equalization aid by that amount.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So I make sure I understand you. So 101 million went to non-equalized schools. So that's the cost to the state that wouldn't otherwise be there.
The 101 would be an additional cost to state that equalization aid is not impacting. Although it is possible a school district, if that was taken out, could become an equalized school. Like if they're really close to being equalized and they get 500,000 of net option funding, that may be enough to push them out of equalization aid. So it is possible that that number could be a little less.
244 different scenarios.
Correct.
Thank you.
Just a piece of it, averaging adjustment, could you go through what that is?
Sure. Averaging adjustment is, again, for the districts that are larger than 900 formula students, and it takes and averages the spending for those districts larger than 900, and if their spending is below that average for the districts over 900, they get an additional amount of funding added to their formula need to make up the difference between that average and what they're spending. So if they're lower spending than the average districts over 900, and they get a bump up to that average, essentially.
And why is that needed? Is it because there's less districts to compare? 10 above and 10 below, not, or a broader range? I mean, I guess bigger difference maybe between the 10 above and 10 below?
I don't know that I can answer why I don't know that I can answer that question. Not sure exactly what the thought process is behind that one.
Yeah, that's why I asked, sorry.
I could share a little bit of history there. So if you go back before LB 988 in 2008, so that's really the basis of the formula that we're currently operating under. So you're going back to potentially Senator Ron Rakes at this point in time. As he pulled together business officials across the state, he talked about the J curve. And when you become large with economies of scale, with very limited resources, because the majority of the school districts in that circumstance were up against a levy lid, your spending can come depressed just because you're constantly averaged against that same group. And there's smaller districts that get the averaging adjustment too. So that was the original economics. There was a real economic study behind the value of the averaging adjustment in the formula. And it's the concept's called the J curve. And so the school districts that were at that bottom needed to be lifted up. There was actually a concept that would actually even bring the top down. That didn't hold with higher spending districts because there was a strong case made that there was a reason for the excess cost. But the economics in the formula and the basis of the formula for how the averaging adjustment was worked was because it was all built on averages. You were taking school districts that were lower spending because they were strapped for resources and averaging them together.
Okay. Not sure I followed it, but.
But there is a real reason for it. I realize there's people who don't believe there's a real reason for it, but there's a real reason for the way the formula works and why it's in place.
And the smaller districts you're talking about are the ones closer to 900 students, is that what you're talking about?
Correct. I'm not sure what the smallest district would be that would get the averaging adjustment, but I know Bryce could look and find out. I bet he does not have that on the top of his head.
It was the largest 13 districts last year.
Okay.
Can you provide a list of those districts?
Yes.
Thank you.
And if you're gonna do that with it, can you provide all of them that are included, the 900 and over? You know what I'm saying? So the whole list and then what got it would be great.
Yep.
Thank you.
And I'd be interested in knowing what the J curve is, I guess, too. If someone can provide that, thank you.
We might have to call Brian Halstead back to the department. I'm sure we can get that somehow. Okay, any other questions for Bryce? Bryce, thanks for your work on both of the presentations. Truly appreciated.
I'm sorry, I don't have a question, but a request. Can you email us the slides?
Oh, yes.
Thank you. Great job. Thank you.
Okay. Before we go to public comment, I want to do a couple of things. So I think one of the questions that comes to my mind as we were working our way through the agenda today was, now what? What do we do next? The first thing we do is we know we meet again on October 31st. I forget if that's it's an 8 a.m. meeting on October 31st. We will continue to do our best to minimize conflicts for commission members. We're doing a pretty good job, but it's not perfect. So we'll keep doing the best we can there. The other thing I would say is we'll work with the thought in mind of some short-term goals and what can we get done by December 1st. And I think there's a decent plan in place, but what we'll do is we will put together an executive committee, and the executive committee will be the committee that we had for this meeting. And that meeting was Treasurer Tom Breezy, Dr. Liz Standish, and Chancellor Paul Terman. So you three will be members of the executive committee, and Dr. Schwartz and myself will round out that committee. So it'll be a 5-member executive committee. So I got to that. If you're wondering, how did you come up with that? The 3 members who were on the planning committee for this meeting, Dr. Schwartz, by virtue of being the vice president of the commission, and myself by being the chair of the commission. So that's the science that went behind that group. And nobody knew I was going to say that, so congratulations for being members of the executive committee. I will use that committee to say what should the agenda look like for the next meeting. We will communicate in advance of the October 31st meeting, and hopefully that group is representative of the whole group to get us to talk about the necessary topics that we need to talk about. Any comments on what that next agenda should look like before we leave today from the larger group?
Is the goal, or at least I thought the goal, is trying to figure out, and this is from the last meeting and conversations I've had with others, what should the state be paying and what should the locals be paying? Is that our overall, one of our overall goals?
That is a large goal, I believe.
I think we should start addressing that at the next meeting.
Yep.
I wonder if one topic of conversation we could have at the next meeting is how do we, I think we have a good handle on how to get the current state of the allocated income tax, which is now a direct property credit, whether you call that property tax credit tier 2, tier 1. I don't know if we have a good data set for tier 1. So I'm curious if there's a way that we could, because that's state money going out to property taxes, a portion of that money, Sarah, you're probably a great resource for this question, is going to school districts, which is state funded. And so I don't know how to capture that data set.
I think it's already captured in Bryce's numbers. We do have a very clear data set in it. The counties reported to us in what's called the CTL, in which they tell us exactly how much they allocated to each political subdivision. So I believe that that is already in Bryce's numbers and is accurately reported.
So it's recorded as a state versus a
Yes,
local? Okay,
yes.
perfect, that's great.
Yes.
I guess I'm asking a question. Would it be worthwhile of our committee to spend a little bit of time looking at the 18 different categories in the needs part of this formula? And are they all still necessary? I know that when you talk about government work, just because you had it once, you got to keep having it again. Is there anything in here that is worth taking a second look at because of history or the school demographics or achievement? Or are we just gonna, these are the 18, they're locked in forever?
Yes.
No, I mean, yes, that is the purview of this group, is to delve into some of these details, I think. I don't know that that's gonna happen the next meeting, right? So I totally see every piece of this potentially being delved into and saying, and even to the point of, well, what is the actual transportation allowance, and does that make sense today at all? You know, is it the right amount? And to your point, do we even need it at all? I'm just using that one as an example, but I think that's completely under the purview of this group, but I doubt it's the next meeting, just because of our timing, so. That's my opinion.
Maybe more of a calendar 26 conversation versus a first step conversation. But definitely a conversation.
Chair?
Yes.
So on the next meeting, when this committee puts the agenda together, will we have a chance to add to the agenda separate, will there be, okay. We know one goal is to talk about state versus local, but I'm a little, are we gonna not have any other things we're gonna talk about here today that we should talk about next time?
Yeah, I think if you want something talked about on the next agenda, now's the time to bring it up.
Yes.
Is that
that's
your
what
question?
Yes, that's what I was thinking,
Yep.
so
Yeah.
a little brainstorming here.
Yeah.
So maybe we do have time. So we're gonna set 5 hours aside for these meetings, then we should have 5 hours worth of agenda items. How about we do it this way? Can we get back to you in the next few days if we think of something?
You can get back to me or anybody, or any member of the executive committee.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
And in fact, we'll send something out prompting that. So if you have topics that you want to bring back, we'll prompt that in case anybody wants to do that. So this isn't my meeting and it's not the executive committee meeting. It's our meeting. So we'll make sure everybody has an opportunity for input to that agenda.
I think the prompting, that's very good, thank you.
I don't know if this would make sense for next week, but not to get into the weeds of it, but would it be possible to have a brief history of option enrollment and how, when it got started, why it got started, what the goals were at the time, just to give us an idea in our heads, maybe is it still accomplishing what the original onset was for it? But I wouldn't think that would take a huge amount of time, but it might be interesting for folks. I know it'd be interesting for myself.
I know we can pull that information up at the department.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I'll come back to you one more time for any additional comments, but in the meantime, let's go to item 9 on the agenda, which is public comment. And we have one person who has signed up for public comment. And Dave Welch, if you would come forward. Push the button on, there you go.
There we go. All right, thank you. Yeah, my name's Dave Welsh. I'm the school board president at Milford Public Schools, just about 30 miles southwest of here. I've been on the Milford School Board for 27 years. Prior to that, I was on a small Class 1 school board for 7 years. So I've been around this discussion for many, many years. Within the last 10 years, I've probably put more emphasis on that by participating in legislative hearings, interacting with many of you, either as a senator or as an educator across the state. And so I really appreciate those interactions with the legislature, these ed groups, as well as farm groups within the last 10 years. And thanks to Bryce, every time I listen to Bryce talk, I learn a little bit more about TIOSA. Obviously, he's the expert and he can answer the questions, but hopefully this group has absorbed all that. You'll go back and look at his slides again, because understanding TIOSA is what this group's all about. If you're going to make changes to it, you need to understand it. So I hope you'll take the time to do that. TIOSA is basically a statewide policy for our state. It began in 1990, so it's been around a long time, but it hasn't really kept up with some recent changes, especially valuation changes. Ag land tripled in value from 2008 to 2016. Residential and commercial property has continued to increase as well. And those valuations are what you multiply the local effort rate, that $1, magical levy. That's how you determine what the yield from local effort rate is. So there probably needs to be some adjustments there within the formula. TIOSA, the first two words are tax equity. We don't have that in the state right now because TIOSA is broken down mainly because of the valuations. And as I said last time, there's farmers that have to sell their beans for $1 more a bushel just to pay the extra property taxes that they have versus their neighbor right across the fence. That's not good state policy. That needs to be addressed. The other two words are educational opportunity. Those opportunities are measured on the needs side of that formula. And the only way you get money from the needs side is if you're equalized. We only have 50 equalized schools in our state right now. In 2008, we had over 200 equalized schools. So if we're looking for tax equity and educational opportunity, changes need to be made there. And in 23 seconds, I don't think I can get into all those changes that need to be made. But yeah, we need to bring levies closer together across this state, and we need to try to have as many schools equalized as possible. Those, I think, are the two main goals that I would have for this committee to take a look at. And I'll stop at 3 seconds. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave.
By the way, net option started in around 07, 08 with LB 1050, I think it was.
Thank you. Okay, I'll give commission members one more opportunity to weigh in on any thoughts on the goals or the process discussion that we've had today, or any ideas for the agenda for October 31st.
Chair.
Yes.
Comments here today, Mr. Welch's comments, and he has been very involved and helpful in the last several years on funding for schools. If we're going to talk about putting levies close together, I think that'd be something we probably need to address next meeting. And to do that, I think we need a list of like, what would it look like? If you're going to push them together, who's the winners, who's the losers, and how many people are we really talking about? Because I'm trying to find, I know that Bryce gave it to us today. And we should, are they going to be that different when we get to 24, 25? I just think if we're going to talk about it, we need to, because if that's one of our suggestions going forward in December, which seems to be, anyway, so I think that's one of the things should be on the agenda.
Any other questions or comments? Yes.
Will we, I know the 24, 25 all throughout this was estimated by, will we have the real numbers by October? I don't think we will.
We won't. We
Yeah,
won't
that's what I
have
thought.
them
We're just
until
shy of
well
it.
into November. And I heard Bryce say today that maybe even beginning of December.
Okay, so that's not gonna happen this year. Okay.
And I am seeing confirmation from Sarah Scott, which makes me feel very comfortable in my
Got it.
statement.
Thank you.
When will we know what the levies are after the 750 million? We won't know that until next year, right?
We'll have the levies, local levies next month, the AFR not till late December.
So for those of you listening in, the answer to the question is we'll have the levies next month. We'll know that for the October 31st meeting, but we won't have the AFRs until late December. So I heard part of what you said.
If we're looking at a levy comp study, if you will, can we include valuations in that as a very relevant indicator of how levies work?
I'm getting a nod of yes, that we can.
Maybe along with that, the number of students in those districts, so it's valuation per student.
The whole thing.
Yep.
Please.
Yes, we can do that.
If we're going to look at bringing valuations or levies together, I would like to know the differences between how that would treat like ag in comparison to residential and commercial taxes. And I know that's not real simple. I've had Bryce work on that before, but I think that's very important to try and determine.
Yeah,
Come up with a figure there.
I think that's, that one's not a simple yes from me, but I'm going to say yes and have Bryce and his folks do their best.
So kind of piggybacking on Senator Merman, and I was gonna talk to Sarah after the meeting anyway. If we could see, even as a state, and I don't know if we want to divide it down smaller, but what the different categories have gone up. Has ag gone up 4%, residential, commercial, 3%, whatever those have been this last year. You know, I get a snapshot of my own district from what I know, but I'd be curious for the state and all that, so, thank you.
Yeah, just to clarify, so we do have school valuations for 2025 already. We don't have the levy component yet, and we don't mirror them together for taxes until December 1. But we could probably do some estimation when we know the levies, because we know the value, so.
I should have threatened to adjourn a long time ago. We got a lot done in the last 10 minutes here. Any other topics that you wanted to raise today that you haven't had a chance to raise yet? Then go ahead.
I just want to comment and something to maybe keep an eye on the bylaws that we agreed to, our operating policies, that any member on the commission can, within 7 days of the next meeting, ask for an agenda item to be on there. We just ask that you have someone else on, one of your colleagues support that. So it can go to Dr. Maher, and then the committee will evaluate, put that forward. So I think we had a long conversation about how do we structure that and create every opportunity along this way for members to make sure the topics that are important are on there, which is why as long as you have one of your colleagues support that as an item, we can advance those forward. So just remember, within 7 days of the 31st, you have the opportunity to work with Dr. Maher to bring those items to the executive committee. So.
Good point. Thank you, Chancellor. Okay. I think that concludes the work for us today. I want to thank you to those who attended in person and those of you who tuned into the broadcast. The next meeting of the School Financing and Review Commission will be held in Lincoln, in this room, on October 31st, 2025 at 8 a.m. The September 22nd, 2025 School Financing and Review Commission is adjourned.